So anyway, as the rabbi said, the Hebrew school people were kicking around the idea of some mini drashes on Moses. And one of the points that came up during that discussion, and I forget who brought it up, but if you look through the Torah, you really don't see any place where Moses was happy, right? And and I thought about that, and that's a really wide-ranging topic, because what means happy? And I sort of had some thoughts, and I got off on some little tangent, and then I said, wait, I am dealing with you folks, and you all have different experiences with happiness, with lack of happiness, with being in a happy state and unhappy state. And I didn't quite want to go there, right? But in looking through the Torah, the 5 books, excuse me, I saw the point. I did not see any place where Moses was particularly happy to be there. And so I got to thinking of then, what is a version of what we all might call happiness that could center a discussion about where he was? And I got to thinking about then, what could I glean from his story and that sort of thing. So I kind of, I sort of rewrote the Torah a little bit. If that's all right. My mother always wanted me to do that. So we're right up at the end. I'm coming from Deuteronomy 33, verse 29, and 33, verse 1 through 6, which is basically the death of Moses. And so I kind of said, if I'm really going to find happiness, given what we've heard about, I think it's going to be there. All right? No place else. So here's I kind of inserted these things in Deuteronomy. Moses went up from the steppes of Moab to Mount Nebo, to the summit of Pisgah, opposite Jericho. Moses and Adonai walked together up the mountain. Together. When they reached the top, Moses leaned back on a comfortable rock and began to compose himself. So did Adonai, who began a conversation. Why? They spoke of various things. Moses with Adonai, Adonai with Moses, until finally Moses kind of looked up and said, Adonai, why are we here? And he replied, Moses, my friend, we are here because I want to give you my thanks. As you recall, during the calf thing back at Sinai, I really lost it. I was going to destroy them all, and you talked me down. I then recalled my resolution to Noah and realized that just as the evil of that time came from youth, so too did the evil of the calf come from youth. One cannot expect people who just come from 400 years of slavery to behave like adults. But by doing this, Moses, you restrained me from manifesting yet one more eternal regret in our current universe. And Adonai showed him the whole land, Gilead as far as Dan, all Naphtali, the land of Ephraim and Manasseh, the whole land of Judah as far as the western sea, the Negeb and the plain, the valley of Jericho, the city of palm trees as far as Zoar. And Adonai said to him, this is the land which I swore to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I will assign it to your offspring. I have let you see it with your own eyes, but you shall not cross there. After all, he further said, with me as your tour guide, you saw this land as it truly is, truly was, and truly will be. Moses thought this through for a bit. The realization arose in his soul of what he, Moses, of his own free will, had done with his life. In his final moments, he felt triumph. So Moses, the servant of Adonai, died there in the land of Moab at the command of Adonai, who buried him in the valley in the land of Moab near Beth Peor, and no one knows his burial place to this day. God buried him. What are we to make of this?
Questions or comments? Blasphemy, maybe.
It's interesting about Moses not being happy. I think there's an inner happiness in serving people. And, you know, serving people, obviously coming to the point of leading our people out of Egypt and doing all the hard stuff. I think there was an internal happiness in that he was able to serve and do that and lead the entire nation to Israel. So I don't know, happiness, it's how you define it. I think he defined it in his work. Like we all do, right?
When Tony said, when we were sitting in the round table in the community room and during the summer, the Hebrew Hub, and he came up with that idea once I suggested, hey, why don't you guys try and come up with some mini drashes? And he got quiet for a minute and came up with that idea. And I thought, wow, that's going to be great. I actually had, this was going somewhere and I forgot what I was going to say, but I see that many of you know.
I wonder if you could change the word happiness to faith, because I think Moses had the ultimate faith.
I guess my thinking here was to try and tie things a little bit to specific words. As I said initially, happiness is such a broad topic. And, you know, you have inner happiness that motivates you as you're going through life. You have, you know, childish happiness of, I got a nice birthday cake. But those are temporary. They're in the middle of life. And when it comes down to it, maybe you could say like the last moment of happiness, I don't know. But what came out of this to me was a man who did unbelievable things with his life. And that's what stuck in my mind. I've had periods in my life where I've been happy. I have periods in my life where I've been very unhappy. What I hope I will see at the end of my life is, wow, I did this. I can look back over the events of my life. I did this. I did this. I did this. I did this. Wow. So that's where I'm coming from there.
I'll bring it over to Stephanie. I know we had some hands up over here. So I now remembered when you said that, and you said, I don't recall Moses being happy. And then we all kind of looked at each other and thought, Moshe Samach, Moses was happy. None of us recalled that ever being in the Torah.
Thank you so much for that. I just was really moved by the nuance and depth. What it made me think about, it's more of a comment than a question, is it made me think about the actual story of the Jewish people.
Mhm.
And for me personally, when I think about my grandparents at 13, their parents sending them off to find a better life, well, they were not happy about that. In fact, it was probably the saddest day of their life, but they were envisioning a future happiness for some future children and grandchildren, of which I am the beneficiary. And so I use that story of, even when I'm unhappy, which is more often than I like to admit, that's not so much what I'm about. It's, this was done so I could live. And so I'm going to do what has to be done. And yeah, I'm hoping to be happy along the way, but stuff happens.
I guess here we should make a division between joy, which in my opinion is more long lasting, and happy.
And I think you also have to look at it at the context of the times. I don't think people were happy generally.
Yeah.
Life was tough.
Yeah.
They were mostly just surviving, especially, the Jews were barely surviving. So I'm not sure that happiness was really a value as opposed to joy.
There's an interesting, in that Deuteronomy section, just immediately before what I started with, there's a chronology, a whole bunch of verses. How happy you are, Israel. And they're in a sense, it's an operational description of happiness at that time. And it sounded very much like Conan the Barbarian.
Right.
Hear the lamentations of their women. It's, and you're right. You're absolutely right. That's probably the operant definition at that point. But the human spirit is there.
Right.
And the human spirit, if it never gets lit, the human spirit, even if it never gets lit, you're in very sad shape. But it's there, and in spite of all of those terrible things, I think enough people had those flashes, those moments, so that we have a faith that things will become good. We have a faith that things are good. And we just got to keep working at it. Mm-hmm.
You need a microphone so the Zoomers can hear you.
Yeah, I said the word we. Yeah.
It's a very important point.
Mm-hmm.
Back then, the emphasis was not on the individual, it
Mhm.
was on the we. As a nation, as a group of people, we were not talking about individualism and happiness as an individual.
Yeah.
We were a nation, we were a group.
Mhm. Yeah.
It's a modern idea to talk
Yeah.
about me and my happiness
Yeah.
and my.
Yeah.
That's
I'd go further and say that it was always me, or it was always we, that the concept of me, I, etc., just was very, very rare.
Thank you. The question of happiness is really profound, of course. And I also, my thoughts were going along with some things that Stephanie was saying about that it's the people might or might not have happiness. And I never thought of Moshe having happiness or not before. And when you were talking about it and other people's comments have come up, the idea that Moshe is kind of the bridge between people and the divine. He's seeing God face to face. He's talking directly, as you know, in your retelling, they're having a conversation. The descriptions are that his face becomes radiant, and Moshe's faith, it's unbearable to see his face. In that state, there's no happiness or unhappiness. It's just completely beyond category, like God.
Yep.
But the people's happiness is, I think, crucial. And I'm thinking about in the whole story, it's like, okay, well, they're celebrating after the Exodus, and then they're told, hey, don't celebrate about my children dying. So that's brought down a little bit. But then, you know, all the festivals are, you know, festivals of happiness. People need that. Does Moshe need that? I think maybe not. I think he's kind of beyond that in his direct contact.
So that comment makes me think of when they broke out in song, the Song of the Sea, right? Where we actually don't know what was the rhythm, what was the beat, what was the mood of that song, right? We see the words after crossing the Red Sea. Now they're in the wilderness, they're out of Egypt, the sea closes in on the Egyptians. And there's this, now we're done with slavery, but we have absolutely no indication of how that song was sung, except that Miriam went out and got her timbrel and they danced.
Well, I wasn't planning on saying anything, and then a spark just went off, and I want to tell a story, and I hope it's a contribution to your drush, Tony. When my wife was pregnant with our first child, I flew to Seattle to visit my uncle. My uncle was a 4'8" survivor of the Holocaust. Came here broke with nobody. He ended up being a world famous oncologist. He saved a lot of lives. There's a long story there, but just picture someone who was diminutive in every way physically and yet a towering spirit. And I was a 29-year-old father-to-be, and he says, what do you want from the life of this child? And I said, I just want him to be happy. Oh boy, was that the wrong answer. Literally a fist came down. No, you want this child to be challenged, and you want this child to carry a great weight and find something to put on the shoulders that he will carry, whether it's his, well, I'll stop. So that was his idea of happiness.
That's very nice.
One more I think we have time for. You want to?
Well, I have a couple of thoughts. Number one is the name of a book by Sylvia Boorstein. Happiness is an inside job. Happiness is an inside job.
It's a choice.
And then there's echoes in the room. I'm thinking of Viktor Frankl and knowing how to I don't know, find the divine in every situation, finding goodness in the worst possible. I think people that can do that have that lightness of spirit that maybe we all call happiness. I'm not sure, but thank you for letting me share that. Those are two thoughts.
I think as we were talking about over here with maybe happiness was not, I think more of this in the wilderness, a sense of safety and security. I think that was pretty much, that would be very calming and might lead to a kind of a happiness.
Thanks, Rabbi. And thanks, Tony, for sharing those words. I really enjoyed your Midrash style description of
that encounter. So when I think of Moses, when I think of Moshe, I think of him as a stoic character. That's the first word that comes to mind when I think of his behavior. He's a seeker of wisdom, demonstrating his courage and being able to temper his anger as much as he can, and being challenged, as has been said. And I think about what is the equivalence of being happy for a Stoic? And I'm looking at like the classical examples. I'm also thinking about others as well. I'm thinking like Marcus Aurelius, I'm thinking Seneca, I'm thinking more contemporary characters. And I think that probably the closest that they would say is their equivalence of happiness is satisfaction. Being able to be satisfied with the outcome of an event, very similar to the way that you described the last hours of his life, where he can look back and he can be satisfied. And also true to what you said, that if you can live in that moment where, as you're in that state, that you feel like everything that you've done was worth it, then that satisfaction, I think, is his version of happiness.
All right, we're going to move on to our next speaker. Thank you, Tony Yashar Koach.